So as I think many of you realize, I was away for a bit. Thank you. I missed you guys too. And Deanna and I took a trip that we had been talking about and planning for a long time, and we said if we don't do it, we might never do it. And so we took a trip to Southeast Asia. We spent some time in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. We saw a number of interesting places. These are very interesting places. And when I got back, somebody said to me, "Did you think about sermons while you were there?" And I said, if I'm thinking about sermons, then it doesn't really feel like I'm away. But the truth is that I'm always thinking about what it is that I want to share. And looking back on what we observed, what I'd like to talk about is a huge idea, which is the way that human beings can choose how to practice religion. Is it being practiced in a way that is triumphalistic and extremist? Is it being practiced in a way that is moderate and compassionate and inviting? And that's something that is important in Southeast Asia. It's important throughout the world. It's important regarding every religion, including, of course, which I'll come to, how we practice Judaism in the world. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of what we experienced vis-a-vis other religions and then turn it inward to our tradition. So we began our trip in Bali, Indonesia. Some of you may have been to these places, which is primarily a Hindu island within a very Muslim nation. And what you see there are offerings that are brought, that are put out in the street, that are put out all over, offerings that are a symbol of graciousness, that ultimately are shared among family and friends, and a lot of reflection on what it means to be humble and to live life in a thoughtful way. Our next stop was Lombok, another small island in Indonesia, which is largely Muslim. And we booked a tour and were taken around privately by a young man. His name was Dani, who identifies as Muslim. And first of all, he showed us his extended family making coffee. And by making coffee, I don't mean taking out the instant coffee and adding hot water. I mean sitting and pounding the coffee beans. And also spoke about the production of rice. And we really saw his village and how it operates. And he said to us that he's never left the island of Lombok. So he seemed to be in his 20s. He spoke about his faith. He prays 5 times a day. Islam came to Indonesia during the Middle Ages, and largely it was brought by the Sufi sect of Islam, and at least initially, very much in tune with other traditions, with ancient animist traditions. And even today, seems to be a less extremist form of Islam than you find certainly in Iran and other parts of the Middle East. And so I was struck by a few things. Women, mostly wearing hijab, who were driving motorbikes all over the island. When you think about Saudi Arabia, which only recently allowed women to drive publicly, that in itself is striking. And what Dani said is that there is a fear that a more extremist version of Islam will come to that island, Wahhabi Islam, which of course we know is practiced in Saudi Arabia. And he said it works now, but the balance might not work if a more extremist form of Islam comes to that island and to the surrounding islands. I witnessed a scene that I videoed because otherwise I felt that people would not believe that it actually took place. A woman in hijab in a mall, a food court in Kuala Lumpur, sitting and playing the guitar and singing songs by modern groups, including ABBA. So imagine a woman sitting in hijab, playing the guitar, and singing Dancing Queen. So I wasn't sure what to make of this. And I said to myself, I need time to absorb it. Many of these places have Hindu temples and Buddhist temples and mosques that are side by side. For sure, these are places that also are problematic in many ways. There are challenges that are faced, and there are approaches to religion that are problematic. But I was mindful of what we witnessed, which was a form of religion less extreme than one sees elsewhere in the world. And I'm summarizing, but on the flight home, to kind of prepare me to re-enter the Western Hemisphere, Deanna and I, because we had 17 hours on the flight, watched the new movie Conclave. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it for you, but it's about the Roman Catholic Church selecting a new pope. And what it does is it explores the contrast between the extremist, triumphalistic elements of the Catholic Church and the more open, compassionate aspects, and the person who ultimately is chosen as Pope. And again, I'll leave out some of the really fascinating aspects of the conclusion, says the following: it is true that the church is about tradition, but it is also about what do we do now? So, with all of this swimming around in my brain and heart, back I come, thinking about how Judaism is practiced in the world. Again and again, here and in Israel, we see Judaism practiced in a way that is extremist, that is triumphalistic, us and not you. We got it right, you got it wrong. But at the same time, we see expressions of Judaism that exude respect for tolerance and for diversity within and beyond the Jewish community. And I have to say that that is the approach that we are trying to take here in our congregation at Temple Israel, putting that approach out into the wider Great Neck community and beyond. But the truth is that it is hard to take that approach when we are on the receiving end of so much violence and so much hatred. It is tempting to say we can only care about ourselves. It is tempting to say everyone who is not us in some ways is the enemy. It is tempting for us to say we can't bring ourselves to care about the full range of diversity that exists in the world, ethnicity and gender and ideology. We just have to protect ourselves. So I am here to say, partly in reflection of the larger picture that I witnessed in these past 2 weeks, that would be the wrong approach to take. Hardening ourselves into a space where we are rigid towards everybody would not be the appropriate response to the very real dangers that face us. That doesn't mean that we don't defend ourselves. Of course we defend ourselves. It doesn't mean that we pretend that those who seek to hurt us don't really mean to hurt us. We know that they mean to hurt us because they are acting in ways that are barbaric. We must respond. We must defend. We must defend our right to defend. And at the same time, we may not allow the anger and the bitterness and the fear that we legitimately feel towards certain sectors to poison the way that we look at everybody. We have real enemies. Anti-Semites on the left that deny Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state are enemies. Anti-Semites on the right that downplay the Shoah that truck in Nazi and neo-Nazi symbols are the enemy. Everyone has to understand that, including the Vice President of the United States of America. It is important for us to identify who our enemies really are. There are people who come into this country who do violence. There are people who have been here for generations who do violence. They need to be fought. You know who's not the enemy? People across the lifespan trying to come to terms with their gender and sexuality, they're not the enemy. People who come to this country because they are seeking to escape from violence, who have not done violence, they are not the enemy. We say every single day as part of our prayers, Atah chonen la'adam da'at. You, God, you give us the capacity to discern. We have to use our ability to discern what is the real danger from what is the artificially imagined danger. We need to discern the difference between that which is truly dangerous and that which is not. We need to discern between those things that require us to steel up our hearts and fight back, and those that require us to open our hearts and find ways to lean in with curiosity and with compassion. So before I conclude, I want to just focus for a moment on one person. His name is Gadi Moses, and he survived a year and a half in captivity in Gaza. 80 years old, abducted from a kibbutz, and member of his families were murdered by Hamas, a real enemy. And he was kept in a tiny cell, and he paced around this teeny tiny cell, counting over and over and solving math problems in his head to prevent himself from getting detached from reality. And when he left with his sanity intact, he also had his humanity intact. And apparently, he said to his captors, one day when there is peace, I'm going to come back here and teach you how to farm. Now, we could hear that and say, oh my God, how ridiculous is that? This is a pie-in-the-sky idealist. If anybody earns the right to say that, it's somebody who experienced and understood the barbarity firsthand. Now, whether he can teach those people to farm, whether peace is possible with those people, is a very serious question. But what he's doing here is applying the Jewish capacity to understand, to defend, to fight back, but also to leave a part of the heart opened to the possibility that one day, if not with these people, then maybe with some willing partners, one day, a different reality might be possible. What an incredible exemplar of what it means to bring a Judaism of protection, but also of understanding into the world. And now I'll conclude by taking us way back to that moment at Sinai. And the Torah tells us, Ve'ata im shamoa tishme'u bekoli ushmartem et briti v'hitem li segula mikol ha'amim ki li kol ha'aretz. And now, if you will listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all the peoples. That's what our ancestors were told. You don't get to be the treasured possession just because of the circumstance of your birth. You're born a Jew, that doesn't make you a treasured possession. You get to be part of the treasured possession if you listen deeply to God's voice. And I believe, after serving this community for more than 20 years, after studying the Bible and rabbinic commentaries, and there is so much more that I still need to learn, after observing the world and the way that religion is applied throughout the world, that to listen to God's voice, to create the world as God wants it to be, is to defend yourself as needed, to create boundaries as needed, but also to leave space in your mind and your heart for the possibility of growth, for the possibility of change, for an appreciation of who your real enemies are and who they are not, to recognize evil, but to not allow the evil people around us to define us. How dare they? To face the teeming, complex, sometimes grotesque, but often glorious world, and to ask the question each day, what do we do now? Shabbat Shalom.